Welcome back to Proxam, everybody, and today we're going to be talking about the 10th edition announcement and what it means for the Craftworld Eldar, and we're just going to be having a brief and honest discussion about the reveals that have occurred. So, I've kind of watched the video a couple times now on the GW Warhammer community website. I've also talked with my local gaming group about it, and the kind of consensus that I've come to is that it's generally going to be positive change for the game. And I was actually really happy with a lot of what GW said, but also let's take this with a little bit of a grain of salt, because GW has in the past had a history of overinflating their own success and where they found that they've improved the game. Let's be real, they've done this many times. And from somebody who's been playing this game for 20 plus years, I can tell you just straight right off the bat, I've been a victim of this, right? I remember 5th edition when 5th edition came out. And they introduced a new concept to the game, which was hull points. And they said that this was going to be a better and easier way of dealing with tanks to prevent people just from spamming the best vehicles. And it wasn't. In fact, it was the opposite. People spammed them even more. And in the later codexes, GW realized their vehicle sales were going up. And instead of nerfing the vehicles like they should have, they were greedy. And basically what they did was they decreased the price of those transport vehicles in future codexes. So you had rhinos for 35 points. I don't know if any of you guys remember that, but yes, rhinos at one point were 35 points. And in some armies, they were completely free. And basically you had armies consisting of something like 12 rhinos on the field with, minimum infantry squads inside, just to be able to fit as many rhinos in a list as you could, or razorbacks or whatever. And this was bad for the game. But anyway, I digress. I hope this doesn't happen with this game or this new edition in any way. I don't think it will. I think GW has actually had a better grip on balance. And they've been a little less greedy when it comes to what's good and what's not in the game and how to balance it. I actually do believe that. I've kind of seen it happen with the last few changes over the course of the last year or so. So honestly, I'm optimistic. But let's go ahead and dive right into what the reveal actually stated, because they didn't reveal everything. They just kind of revealed a couple things here and there. So let's go ahead and look into it a little bit. But before we do that, just a quick overview of what we're going to be looking at in this video. We're going to be doing just a review of the revealed rules so far with my honest commentary and analysis. We're going to be looking at the predictions for the Craftworld Eldar and overall thoughts and impressions of the reveal, and of course 10th edition. So what has actually been revealed about 10th so far? So basically it's coming in early summer. It's going to have a vastly simplified rule set, with most of the rules being on unit data sheets instead of in a book or a codex. We're going to have a codex and rules reset. So, of course, it's going to be a new edition, so there's going to be a new rules book. And every army is going to get a free index with all of their units in it. However, this is kind of problematic for Eldar because we may not actually have access to all of our units right away. And this is something I actually fear that could happen with our index, is that we have some units that are out of production that they're not going to include in the index, but will include in an Eldar release later on. So perhaps Phoenix Lords or something like that will be included in, the actual codex, but won't be included in this index. I hope that's not the case. They haven't confirmed that or anything like that, but I do fear it's going to happen, as I fear it will happen with any models that they just don't have. Well, basically that aren't being produced or able to buy in the store. The psychic phase has also changed as well, and also how morale works has changed. So as for the psychic phase, there's going to be no more psychic phase. They're obliterating it and replacing it with psychic powers that are used in specific phases based on the data sheet available. So for example, Guide and Doom might be used at the end of the movement phase, whereas things like Executioner or Mind War will be used in the assault phase. Or, the shooting phase. I don't know why I said assault phase, the shooting phase. That would be a little bit silly if it was in the assault phase, but the shooting phase. So that change is interesting, and we'll talk about that a little more in depth later in this video. Attacks and strength are also based on the weapon and not included in the unit profile. That's an interesting streamlined change. And lastly, objective secured and the ability for units to control objectives has changed as well. And something I didn't put on here but was just revealed earlier this morning, I just kind of became aware of it probably about 20 minutes ago, was the fact that universal special rules are back. So instead of every single army getting basically the same ability, just called something else, universal special rules will be returning. So I actually like that because even though it added a little bit of fluff flavor to a lot of the books, having something like advanced deployment or, advanced positions or something like that. Every veteran who's played this game basically knows that's just another name for infiltrate. And when you have, 20 different armies with 20 different names for the same rule, it gets kind of redundant and kind of confusing. So I definitely agree with that change. I think they did a good job bringing that back. So looking at one of the things that GW said first, they said that there's basically going to be less stratagems, but the stratagems that are going to exist are going to be more impactful and more reactive. There's going to be more concise turn phases, so again, the removal of the psychic and command phases, and terrain is somehow improved, but we don't know how yet. My guess is that terrain rules will be kind of altered and improved to be more balanced. So, that whole debacle with units in ruins basically being able to be placed in a way that made it impossible to assault them, that's probably going to go away somehow. I don't know exactly how yet, but I'm hoping it's a good thing and not something that's even worse than the fix. So I'm hoping for that. I'm hoping that obscuring terrain stays. I think we need something like that. If the game returns to true line of sight, I really do think that's going to impact us in a very negative way. But I don't really see them getting rid of obscuring terrain because it's been a very popular concept. And within the coming weeks, GW has stated that they're going to go into more of these changes in depth. So what I'm going to do for you guys is basically I'm going to be coming up with posts as the changes come out on my opinion about them and how they're affected. I don't want to make a separate video about each little reveal that they make. So I'll just kind of post it on the channel, update you guys with it, and go from there. And then that way I can kind of focus more on strategy content instead of just reveal style content. Because to be honest with you, even though this is all exciting, a lot of it is just not going to have anything to do with Craftworld Eldar strategy or tactics. Okay, now one of the other reveals that they made was that there's going to be a free rules download for factions via the indexes on launch, and I honestly wouldn't be surprised. I think they actually stated this as well, that the core rules would also be free. I'm hoping this means that all of the rules for all the missions and stuff will also be free instead of basically what they promised us last time and just gave us a bare bones, non-functional almost, set of rules for the game. Basically, you still had to buy the rulebook. Now, here's my opinion on buying rulebooks for games, right, that require a lot of money. So Warhammer is a game that has a lot of investment. Why would I spend $50 on a rulebook just so I can figure out if I like the game or not? That's not a very smart move. I don't even think it's smart from a business perspective. So I'm hoping that the rules are free so that I can look into it, if I'm a new player, that is, and find out whether I like the game or not. I think that's a better thing for new players in general and the community as a whole. And this was also interesting. So I really liked this from GW because it's basically confirming that Codex Creep is going to be something they're paying attention to. So even when the codexes return, the rules will still be very simple and won't suffer from rules bloat. And I say that hopefully because obviously GW is going to, when new codexes come out, make a few little things here and there that are going to be better that people want to buy, right? And that's just to make more money, basically, on sales. But I'm really hoping that they do a good job balancing new codexes as they come out, as they, to be honest with you, have in the past few codexes. I don't think we've seen really, really OP codexes like the NIDS when they came out or when the Tau came out. We haven't really seen that lately. So I'm actually thinking that they're paying more attention to this. And again, I think this can only help their business, right? The amount of models they sell and so forth, it can only help them to make a balanced game so everyone continues to enjoy it and doesn't quit right as they begin the hobby. So as far as Armulus Construction goes, they have confirmed basically you can take anything. So you need a warlord and you're limited to 3 units of one type. But other than that, you can take whatever you want. Now, they've also said they've incentivized taking different units because each unit will get a special ability or something like that you can only use once a game, or most units will get something like that. And although I think that concept is cool and will prevent some spam, I think basically what we'll see is people still taking the best units. So we'll just have to wait and see about more information on this. But for the most part, I like it. I think this allows us to make more conceptually based armies instead of just armies that are, maybe not as fluffy, right? So we can take things like Iandin or Samhain much easier because we're able to include more of those units in our lists. So I only think this is going to be good in general for Eldar, but again, we're going to have to wait and see on what kind of special rules they're talking about and once a game uses they're talking about for each data sheet. They also came out with an announcement that there's going to be a new game mode for Combat Patrol, which I absolutely love. And I've been saying this on the channel for a long time now. I think the Combat Patrol box isn't really good for starting Craftworld Eldar, and I'll continue to say it. It's good if you want to start Uthway. It's a really good box for that. But if you want to start any other Craftworld or want to do anything else with it, it sucks. Because A, with Arcs of Omen now, you have to buy additional models anyway, because it doesn't fit into the Arcs of Omen detachment. And B, all the unit synergies are all over the place. So if you choose a different kind of Craftworld, like a Bealtan Craftworld, you have no Aspect Warriors in that box, you're not going to have a good time, and you're probably going to waste a lot of money buying that box, even though it is at a discount. So I'm glad they're actually making there be a new way for new players to get into the game, enjoy the game right off the bat, and have fun with it instead of, basically requiring people to buy even more stuff at the start, which can be a huge hurdle to overcome for a new player, especially somebody who just dropped $100 on a box of models. And again, these are new players. They might not, most of the time, right? They might not exactly know if they want to play this game or not, but they figured they'd try it out. No one wants to spend $200 just to try something out. So I think this is a good thing that they're doing here. They also revealed an example data sheet of Termagons. So I think this was really cool, and it gave us a lot of information. And just looking at it, right, it's a much more concise data sheet with all the relevant rules. It doesn't have any redundancy. Toughness is still here, though. So those rumors that basically ended up either being false or either GW made a hard reverse on it, honestly, thank God. I wasn't really excited for it, to be honest with you guys. Wound rolls have been in the game for a long time, and I'm glad they're here to stay. I think it's a staple of the game. And yeah, I'm happy that toughness is still there, to be honest with you. I think we would have managed if it wasn't, I think I still would have had fun with the game. I don't see myself not playing, even if they got rid of toughness, but I'm glad they kept it because I think it's iconic, in a lot of ways. Strength and attacks are now tied to the weapon used, which I think is also a good change, right? I think this is a good change because this makes it easier to know what you're attacking with. And now every unit is going to get some sort of attack with a close combat weapon and possibly a shooting weapon, which is cool, right? So now you don't have to refer back to the stat line of the model to know that it can attack at that profile. So that's kind of cool. Now, the other thing that you can see here is that the unit has a new stat, and it's called objective control. And it's basically a determination of how good a unit is at controlling objectives. So on one hand, I'm excited about this because I think objective secured was kind of a wonky system that allowed for a lot of weird stuff. On the other hand, I think it could possibly be problematic for Craftworld Eldar. I'll talk a little bit about why later in this video, but we're not really great at holding objectives, and I hope this value reflects that. I hope that we're able to get some units with a lot of objective control that we can use to control objectives, right? I don't know what that is, but maybe Rangers have a greater objective control than other units. I hope that's the case. But regardless of whether I think it benefits Eldar or not, I do think it's a good concept, and I think it's a move in the right direction because objective secured just wasn't really working out, right? I mean, how can, for example, one Space Marine capture an objective from, 10 Swooping Hawks? It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense if you think about it, right? So I'm glad they made that change. So what are my predictions for the Craftworld Eldar? So obviously, I think one of the things that's going to change is there's going to be a much better internal balance, as GW seems to be trying to make that a priority in the new book. And they've actually said it several times that they want to make the internal balance good. They want there to be a use for every single unit in the codexes. That's great that they said that. Who knows if that's true, right? That may actually not be true. They may intend for that, but GW isn't the best at writing rules. So that may not actually happen, but I'm glad that they're acknowledging it, and I'm glad that they're trying. That's honestly far and above way better than they used to do. I think also streamlined data sheets will make the faction easier to learn. So this is great for new players, and the reason why I started this channel really was to help new players with the game and also kind of talk about the ways in which we can be effective as an army, which is really hard to learn for people just getting into the game. Because on top of a very complex game, you have a very complex faction that is really intolerant to mistakes. And I think having streamlined data sheets will help new players learn the rules faster and, if so facto, be able to basically become better at the game quicker. So I like that. I also think that based on the Termagon example, I think it's safe to say that rules like battle focus will be retained in some form. And it might be different than the way it actually works now. It might be more reactionary. Like, for example, maybe when an enemy targets that unit with a ranged attack in the shooting phase, you might be able to make a move as a reaction to that shooting attack, which basically is like Termagons now, right? When you get within 9 inches of a Termagon unit, it can actually move back d6 inches or move wherever it wants d6 inches to represent their basic cowardness and instinctive abilities. But for Eldar, it could mean when you're targeted by some sort of attack, your unit is able to move back d6 inches or move in any direction they want d6 inches, which could represent that battle focus. So yes, it's more reactionary. Yes, there's pros and cons to that. I think the cons is that you don't get to choose immediately and it's based on what your opponent does, which could be problematic against very experienced opponents. But I also do think it's kind of cool and there might be some advantages to it. Like, for example, if your opponent chooses not to shoot that unit, then that means you don't have to move back beforehand. So you don't have to move your unit until your opponent makes a move against them. So that means you don't lose distance on the field if you don't have to, right? Or you don't lose your position on a certain area of the board if you don't have to do it. So again, I think it's safe to say that Eldar units will have this ability in some form. And with toughness of vehicles going up, they mentioned that some vehicles are going to be, up to toughness 12. And we don't know what the wound chart looks like yet. But based just on that, I think specialist units are going to be much better. Units like fire dragons, units like D cannons, units like fire prisms that are specialist anti-tank hunters are going to be vastly better. Because low strength weapons like shuriken catapults and things like that are just not going to be as good against vehicles in general. They're probably going to be, I'm speculating a little bit here, but they're probably going to be wounding on 6s now, right? Against vehicles, which now against most toughness 7 vehicles, they wound on 5s. And that's pretty good. That means shuriken catapults can take down a fair number of vehicles. But with this new addition, I think they're going to limit that power. So even though it's possible to still kill vehicles with a really high toughness, it's going to be much harder to do so. And I think specialist weapons like dragon fusion guns, fire prisms, D cannons and stuff like that are just going to be much, much better at ripping open vehicles. And that's going to create a lot of strength for our army because we are, at the end of the day, an army of specialists. So I think that's where our strengths lie. And I really like that they're doing that in general. As for the psychic phase and powers, I actually don't think it will have as much of a huge impact as we think. So a lot of us are kind of afraid of this, that they'll make it at the beginning of the turn and will basically be unable to cast psychic powers on units coming in from reserve or after you move. So you're going to have to plan things so much more in depth and it's going to be much harder to play. And I think that that's actually not going to be the case. And the reason being is because they've already stated that psychic shooting abilities will be done in the shooting phase. So I think that it just kind of goes along with it that maybe buffing powers will be done at the end of the movement phase. So as long as things like Guide and Doom are done at the end of the movement phase, I don't think there's going to be much of a difference as far as functionality goes between, what we have now. And again, I could be wrong on this. They could just do it at the beginning of the turn, some of these powers, and that would absolutely suck for a lot of reasons. But I don't think it would be impossible to overcome. In past editions, Eldar players had to deal with the fact that they had to cast in the beginning of the turn. So we've already had to overcome this challenge, and people still took Farseers. right? I mean, Farseers were basically in every single list in 5th edition, every single list in 4th edition, and honestly, they've been just a very solid core choice for every single Eldar list from the beginning of time. So I don't think that's going to change. I think people are still going to use Farseers. We just have to find a new way to use them if that's the case. But again, I don't think it will be, just because I think GW wants to make things a little less clunky in that way. And again, things a little bit more streamlined. But we'll just have to wait and see. The other thing I'm hoping for, and they haven't said this yet, I don't think, but I'm hoping for casting values that are streamlined and based on the proficiency of the Psykers themselves. So, for example, Farseers cast all their powers on a 6+ maybe, instead of casting values that are different based on the power. I think that would be much more streamlined and much easier to understand for a new player coming to the game than, oh, there's 6 powers here and they all have different casting values. And oh, look at this. If I cast, if I roll more than a 10, it gets an additional effect somehow. I think that's stupid, guys. I think when I saw Psychic Powers, in the beginning of 9th edition and I saw the new Eldar Codex doing that, I really just kind of cringed a little bit, because I was like, why are we adding complexity to something that doesn't need it? Especially since those extra casting values were often worthless, basically just adding a little bit of distance to your cast. And yes, sometimes it would matter, but when are you ever going to roll a 10+? When are you ever going to roll a 9+, unless, you're using a Strands of Fate? And oftentimes, half the time, it won't even be relevant, right? So I think if they streamlined casting values and made the casting value on the Psyker itself, rather than the actual power, that would be awesome. And that would actually be a very fluffy and lore-friendly move for GW to do, because Farseers cast powers much easier. They have a much better command of the warp than other races. Human races, like Space Marines or Imperial Guard or stuff like that, maybe Imperial Guard would be even less, but Space Marines, maybe they cast things on a 7+. Maybe they can have some sort of upgrade that helps them with that. But Farseers maybe cast on a 6+, and you could have other advanced psychic races casting on a 6+ as well, like Thousand Sons, for example. A lot of their exalted sorcerers could cast on a 6+, and maybe you have special characters like Eldrad Uthran and Ahriman and stuff like that casting on a 5+, or being able to re-roll their casts. I think that would be an excellent way of streamlining psychic powers, and honestly very powerful, and something I hope they implement. Okay, so what are my overall thoughts and impressions? So one thing is, I really like the direction, but Slaanesh is in the details, guys, and my hope is that the simplification of the game doesn't make the Eldar feel anywhere near stale or reduce their skill cap in any way. Which is honestly a fair concern that I think a lot of people in the Craftworld Eldar community can level with, right? I mean, why do we play Eldar? It's because they're tricky to learn, but they're very rewarding, right? Well, if they don't become tricky to learn and they don't have a lot of special rules, interactions, and combos and stuff like that, are they going to be as rewarding to play? And are they basically just going to feel the same or similar to other factions? So I think that is a concern. Again, I hope they address that and they make that clear that Eldar is still a complex faction. It's still going to be hard and difficult to play, but has a high learning curve, and maybe just the rules and where to find the rules are a little bit more simple. All the rules, again, being on cards, I think is fantastic, and it actually reminds me of how much I enjoyed and liked a game called War Machine and Hordes that I played back in the day, and basically all the rules were printed on cards that came with the actual model kit. So you didn't have to buy rules for every single model, which was great. You just came with the card and you knew the rules, and you basically could just play from there. Also, I think the Combat Patrol, obviously, like I said before, feels like a better intro box now that it has its own game around it. Which is really cool and really positive, I think, because before it was kind of just like, okay, well, you're basically only going to buy the Combat Patrol if you want to play Uthway, because in Arcs of Omen, it's either illegal to play it in actual games, or you're just not going to use most of the units in it. So I think the fact that it has its own game now that's going to be balanced somehow is going to be actually really good for new players. And I also think about the Ultramarines versus the Tyranids intro box, I think that's really boring, guys. I honestly had no excitement for it when I saw it. In fact, I actually laughed out loud because I remember in 4th edition, they basically had the same thing, which was the Battle from a Crag, which was, Tyranids from High Fleet Leviathan, I think, versus Ultramarines. And it's just boring. It's basically just a copy and paste from 4th edition. And I get it. They have new models and everything, but I still find that a bit stale. So I don't really care about the lore that's going on in the beginning of the series because they haven't said anything about Eldar and their kind of interaction with that whole thing. And yeah, you can't make me care about Ultramarines. I really just don't give a damn, to be honest. But the Eldar picture they included in their announcement gives me hope that they might have an Eldar release soon into the new edition. So I know this is speculation, guys, but they have a lot of armies out there, and Eldar is not a popular army, really, comparatively, but they chose to put an Eldar diorama in their announcement. And I think this tells us that maybe they're thinking of doing an Eldar release because, again, like I said, we have a really old range of models that really need updates. And I think this is a good way for GW in the new edition early on to, because they've, taken the old models out of their store, to put some new models in. And again, I wouldn't be surprised if they already had plans for this for a while, but they were waiting for a big kind of push of new players to be able to sell this, right? So I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case, and I wouldn't be surprised to see an Eldar release a couple months after 10th edition. And again, it might not even be the new Codex. They might not be releasing the new Eldar Codex or anything. It might just be an extra box of Phoenix Lords or characters for Eldar that you can purchase as part of, some sort of narrative story or something like that. Also, the new objective system might actually be a little bit problematic. And I kind of touched on this a little bit when I talked about that objective control stat. And that's because Craftworld Eldar aren't really good at holding objectives. I mean, we can hold objectives just like any other, faction, but we can't survive on objectives for multiple turns, and our units are typically more expensive, and thus, using them to hold an objective is a little bit problematic cost-effective-wise, right? So I think and I hope that GW has a way to compensate factions like Eldar to make up for the fact that we don't have a lot of great units for holding objectives. I hope they find a way to do that. They may do it in the data sheets. They may give us things that are better holding objectives like Wraithguard and Wraithblades. I think if they made the units, better on objectives, gave them more objective control, I think that would be awesome. I also think giving things like Rangers objective control would be really awesome too, because that's kind of their thing anyway. So it makes sense that they would have a better hold on objectives over other units. Okay, so in conclusion, I think the rumors had me a little bit mixed. I'm going to be honest. When the rumors were coming out and I was reading them, and some of you guys were emailing me about some of the rumors, I was reading through those things and I was like, man, some of these things suck. Some of these rule ideas really suck. And even though, obviously, whatever it is, we're going to find a way to play and have fun, right? Because we love this game. But I wasn't too happy about some of the concepts. And now that the official reveal is out, thank God some of those things don't exist. Like the fact that the rumors were saying they were going to get rid of toughness. I'm glad they didn't do that because I felt like there could be a lot of balance issues with a system like that in 40K, right? And I think regardless of what each unit is and how powerful each unit is and stuff like that, and kind of the internal balance of the books when they come out, I think it's generally going to be a positive change, and I'm glad that the direction GW is going is not towards a let's make as most money as possible direction, but let's listen to people a little bit that play our game, because maybe listening to the community is a better way of getting trust and actually making more money in the long run, right? Because people are actually going to buy our stuff instead of go to other games like War Machine and Hordes and, Star Wars and other kind of model games, right? Because maybe the game developers of those systems actually listen to their player base. So I'm glad that they're doing that, and I'm positive to see the coming results in the coming weeks. And again, expect to see posts on my channel. Basically, when any update comes out, I'll do a community post for you guys and talk to you guys about my opinion on it and kind of how it affects the Craftworld Eldar in the coming weeks. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today. I just wanted to do a quick kind of discussion about the 10th edition reveal. Nothing too in-depth, but I just wanted to get this video out there basically as quick as possible so you guys could kind of know my opinion on it and kind of have some food for thought as far as the changes and how they'll affect our favorite faction, the best faction in the game, of course, Craftworld Eldar. All right, everybody, that's going to be it for today. Peace out. I'll see you guys later. If you do want to support me on Patreon or PayPal, the links will be in the description. Thank you so much for all of those who have supported me over the months, and I really appreciate it. And again, just a reminder, anybody who's a supporter, go ahead and if you want a video idea or a list idea or list help or any kind of advice or anything like that, go ahead and shoot me an email. My email's in the channel description. That's going to be on my page. And you can go ahead and shoot me an email and just let me know what you want. And I'll kind of work on that because, I'm doing this for you guys, really, the community. Not really doing this for myself. I really just want to, make the Craftworld Eldar community stronger. So, all right, everybody. Peace out and have a great weekend filled with great games. Have a good one, everybody. See you later.